there's certain things that challenge folks with ADHD depending on the symptoms. One common one I like to list is like folding laundry or, doing the dishes or something that's kind of routine, not terribly exciting. Those things, because the ADHD brain is wired for interest, we struggle a little bit with it. And so when both people have ADHD, sometimes that day-to-day stuff gets neglected, and then that can create friction too.
Welcome to Season 2 of ADHD Difference. I'm your host, Julie Legg, ADHD advocate, author of The Missing Piece, A Woman's Guide to Understanding, Diagnosing and Living with ADHD, and an unapologetic doer of many things. This season, we're turning up the volume with a global lineup of brilliant guests, bringing their lived experiences, insights, research, strategies, and resources. And of course, along with a healthy dose of humour and humility. Whether you're neurodivergent yourself or just curious, there's something here for every curious brain. Let's dive in. Today, I'm joined by Bryan Gastelle, a clinical psychologist and the founder of a neurodivergent affirming telehealth practice based in Arizona. Bryan specialises in ADHD, couples therapy, and helping busy adults navigate anxiety, burnout, and relationship stress. He understands how ADHD and neurodivergence shape communication, emotional regulation, household dynamics, intimacy and conflict, and how relationships can thrive when both partners feel seen, supported, and understood. Today, we'll be talking about how ADHD shows up in romantic relationships, what healthy conflict really looks like, and how partners can support each other without falling into rescuing or resentment. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
Thank you.
But before we dig into relationships, I'd love to start with your own connection to this work and what led you to specialise in ADHD, couples therapy, and neurodivergent friendly care.
Of course. So really, I've had an interest in psychology for pretty much as soon as I was introduced to it. So that was a big part of it. Another big part is my personal lived experience with ADHD. I've dealt with this symptoms since a young age. And so I do have a connection to it there. And I think between that and my love of helping people, I fell into the psychology field. And as I was going to my grad school program, I did a rotation at the Penn Adult ADHD Research Center. And there I did some assessment with folks and I did some therapy for ADHD. And I learned a lot about the tools and strategies to work through it. So really, that's what captivated me. And I've been doing it ever since.
Having ADHD yourself, it really puts your own lived experience into the picture too when you're dealing with your clients, which is great. To set the scene, what do you think people are getting wrong about adult ADHD right now?
Sure. So actually, one thing I see in my practice a lot is this misconception towards the hyperactive, impulsive type of ADHD. And I think it comes from that stereotype of, maybe in grade school, we knew that kid, like the class clown, the one who's very vocal, very impulsive. And I think that's the stereotype for a lot of people and what ADHD looks like. And so I'll get clients that come in and they have maybe the inattentive type, or maybe they've learned to, cope with it, hyperactive, impulsive, symptoms like, fidgeting or trouble sitting still or things like that as adults, and they don't realize that they actually have it. So I'd say that far and away, the biggest misconception is that stereotype as being the only presentation of ADHD when it can take many forms. And the other thing about it is that even the symptoms within, one type or another, somebody could be, have a strong working memory, let's say, but really struggle with organization, or, maybe be a little bit less hyperactive, but a little bit more impulsive. So it's one of those things that it can vary quite a bit, really.
Yes, absolutely. And after years of living with ADHD, majority of which say is undiagnosed, we learn coping mechanisms. And so a lot of our traits can be hidden or appear to be hidden and can come out during stressful moments when we no longer can mask and hide some of those traits. So we'll talk about some interesting things as we go along through the episode. ADHD doesn't just affect the individual, it affects the whole relationship. And from your clinical lens, how does ADHD or neurodivergence impact romantic relationships?
So there's a number of ways that can come out, and relationships, by nature are very complicated. But I'll tell you some of the most common things I see. So when one partner has ADHD, one common thing I'll see is a misunderstanding between the ADHD partner and the neurotypical partner. And so maybe someone with ADHD, let's say it's, inattentive type, they're going to, maybe forget some things or be a little late to show up or something like that, symptoms that are pretty much associated with it. And then the neurotypical partner, because the symptoms are things that neurotypical people do on occasion, but much less, they start to internalize it and think like, oh, this person doesn't care about me, or, they're doing this on purpose, or it's some kind of character flaw. And then that can create a lot of friction in a couple. And then the other thing that could happen when both parties have ADHD is more just, there's certain things that challenge folks with ADHD depending on the symptoms. One common one I like to list is like folding laundry or, doing the dishes or something that's kind of routine, not terribly exciting. Those things, because the ADHD brain is wired for interest, we struggle a little bit with it. And so when both people have ADHD, sometimes that day-to-day stuff gets neglected, and then that can create friction too.
My husband has ADHD, as would I, and we only found this out in recent years, but it makes sense now. Some of our patterns or our impulsivity, and sometimes it clashes because if we're both high energy, that's wonderful, but if we're both low energy, it can be interesting, definitely. And many listeners are in relationships where one partner has ADHD or anxiety or burnout, or was quite nervous about starting therapy for the first time. How can partners better support someone they love without sort of slipping into parenting or rescuing or nagging type roles?
I love that question. It's very important. So I see this a lot of times when the one partner having ADHD couples, so maybe your neurotypical partner is more efficient at, planning things or structuring things, and just, a little bit less symptomatic. And then the person with ADHD really struggles with those things. And so to compensate, the neurotypical partner takes on all of these responsibilities. The problem is that you're doing two things, really. One is enabling the person with ADHD not to cultivate those skills, which can be a big problem for that person's self-esteem and also the relationship as a whole. And then I think the other thing is that it burns out the person who is neurotypical sometimes because they have to, basically lift for two people instead of one. And so I would say set boundaries. It's okay to be realistic and say like, okay, I'm a little bit better at this, so I'm going to take this thing on, but within reason. So you have to know where the boundaries are and make sure that it's not all one way or all the other.
It'd be very exhausting. Yeah, being that everything in the relationship, doing everything, thinking for the other person, trying to assist. But as you said, enabling might not be so good for the growth of your partner or for yourself, depending who's sitting in that chair. Very interesting. In your work with couples, what does healthy conflict actually look like?
So healthy conflict is a number of skills, I think, or a number of things need to happen for it to be, in my opinion, healthy. But I'll say the building blocks to it. And for those interested, I would recommend looking a little bit more into the Gottman method and the Gottman research, because I'm about to use that. So one thing that I like to do to build communication from the get-go is I statements. And I statements are a way of disarming a little bit when you walk into something that you know is going to create a little bit of friction. So an example I like to use is coming home to dishes. So let's say that somebody comes home to a sink full of dishes and they use probably a more common reaction, which is I call a you statement. So you never help around the house. I'm tired of coming home to dishes. Something, but you never help around the house, I guess, would be a true you statement. And of course, the person hearing that is not going to be very receptive to that. But if you flip it around and you say, I feel, and put an emotion after it, like, I feel really overwhelmed when I get home to these dishes. Do you think you can help me out? The other person's probably going to react a lot better. And we're taking accountability for our side of it. So it's not going to put the person on the defense. And then the other side of the communication I like to start out with is validation. And so validation is basically sensing the person's emotion and saying, I hear you. It's understandable. We don't have to agree. We don't have to, acquiesce. But validation for that I statement, I feel overwhelmed when I come home to a sink full of dishes, might be like, that does sound like it would be overwhelming. Period. Right. And then if you want to throw in, how can I help or what can we do? Then that part is extra, but that's just the validation piece.
I agree. And taking ownership, there's no blame. It's how I feel. That's a great way because there's a few things when it comes to conflict. We know that we can get quite fiery, and our fight or flight or whatever it may be, there's avoidance, things can get quite chaotic. We can just sort of blurt out without a filter and things can get quite challenging. So great tips. Thank you very much. On the flip side of that, what are some maybe early warning signs that conflict is slipping into patterns that aren't useful or safe for the relationship?
So I figured this would be a good opportunity to go over the Four Horsemen under Gottman's method. So there's these 4 concepts. They're called the Four Horsemen, and they're things you really want to watch out for in any relationship. So the first is criticism. Then we have defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So criticism is usually the first. It comes about when the communication it starts to get a little shaky and somebody's needs aren't necessarily getting through. So somebody's trying to say, hey, I need this. The other person is maybe just not hearing it or not reacting. And so when someone's needs aren't being met, oftentimes they'll start coming out in other ways, which is usually criticism. So when that criticism happens, what can happen as a result is the defensiveness. So if we're criticized enough, then, we're going to start fighting back, right? And getting defensive. And so that can turn into a problem in and of itself, as if one partner expects, or even both partners expect a problem, there will probably be a problem. And so that can be problematic too. Contempt is where I would start saying that you'd want to look at couples therapy. I think if there's contempt in a relationship, there's really time to see a professional. But that's sarcasm, eye-rolling, mockery, disgust, usually kind of a end result of a lot of criticism and defensiveness. And then stonewalling is the last one, where it's basically just shutting down, going blank, not saying anything. And a lot of times people will do that if they're emotionally dysregulated or overwhelmed. So maybe, we're bringing up this long time sore spot or something, and somebody just goes quiet. That would be an example of stonewalling. And I'd say if either stonewalling or contempt are happening in the relationship, it's probably a good time to seek some care and, take care of the relationship.
On that, how would you go about suggesting to your partner that it's time for therapy? Because it's quite a touchy subject, isn't it?
It is. It is. That's a good point. So to bring it up to the partner, I think we've got to be careful about the stigma. There's a lot of stigma around therapy. I've heard it all, in my work. And, one thing I've heard is that it means that the couple is struggling, right? Or you shouldn't have to get therapy. I've heard that. Or, I think it just carries a basic stigma to it anyway. Like, oh, you're getting therapy. So people have their preconceptions about it. And I think it's important to understand your partner, where they might come from ahead of time. And then, bring it up in a gentle way. Like, hey, I use the sandwich technique. There are things that are great about this relationship, but there are things that are not so great. Like, let's go in for, to work on those and frame it as like kind of a team effort would be the advice I would give to someone thinking about bringing that up to their partner.
I wonder too if a therapist almost becomes quite a safe space in a relationship that is prone to being volatile, having that third person there to keep the calm, keep everything in order, I think would be quite a relief, really, for many people. Many adults with ADHD or anxiety feel nervous about going into the therapy because they think they might be misunderstood or judged or told they're too much, So what would you say to someone who's hesitant to take that first step?
I would first say that I understand where you're coming from. It's scary to go in and share parts of ourselves that, we're normally keeping hidden or maybe feel even a little bit embarrassed about and things like that. Really, though, if I would say good therapy is non-judgmental, curious, and validating. A therapist really should not be judging their client. They should definitely not make their client feel like they're too much. And so I think if either of those happening or if they feel like they're happening, it might be more of a issue of like, does the therapist fit your personality rather than should you seek therapy at all? Really, therapists by training, we're really not supposed to be judgmental or, say things like that. So hopefully that's of some solace too. And I think the other thing I would say is that there's no commitment. When you take that first step and you go in for a session, that doesn't mean you have to do 12 sessions of therapy. If you don't like it, you can always stop and do something else. So I would say give it a try. It can only help.
What can a couple expect if they come to you and say, look, we've got some issues? Do they need to tell you in advance what they're coming in for, or can they walk in and let's explore what a therapy session could look like?
Largely depends on the therapist. Therapists have different styles. Personally, with me, I will send a short questionnaire to folks to just answer some of the basics so that, we feel like we're coming in a little bit prepared. But some therapists will just, they'll just start. And so it does really just depend on the therapist. The process is unique each time. If there's a certain type of couples therapy, you can expect certain things. So there's Gottman method, there's EFT, there's a few others, but really it depends on the type of therapy and the therapists themselves.
By the way, links to how to get in touch with you will be in the show notes. So if anyone's interested to check you out and to see what else you can help with, that will all be in the show notes. And you specialise in helping busy adults manage anxiety and burnout and relationships. What's a practical, evidence-based tool that you teach clients that listeners could start using today?
So one of my favorite techniques to teach people is called the 5% rule, because whether we're burnout, depressed, anxious, in some kind of relationship strain, there's usually some kind of goal that feels intimidating to reach. right? Because we wouldn't stay stuck if we didn't have to. And so usually that's the case. And so what the 5% rule is where you take the full goal and then you say, what's 5% of that? And I'm going to set my goal to do that today, right now. And so whether that's, taking that exercise class or applying for that different job or asking your boss for that raise, just ask yourself, what's 5% of that? So I'll give examples for those. Shop for exercise classes, write down 3 URLs or copy paste 3 URLs, save them for later. Browse the job search platform and save 3 jobs. Picture asking your boss for that raise. Then once you're done with that 5%, set a goal and a reminder a couple days out to follow up.
So it's approaching things in small chunks without being overwhelmed by something that could appear to be too big for us to cope with.
Yeah. And I would say it's also really beneficial for folks with ADHD because we're big picture thinkers, right? So we see a goal and we think about the entire goal. So if somebody says, I need to find a new job, that's a big goal by itself. But if we say, I've got to research it for, 15 minutes, favorite 3 jobs, send my application a couple days later, it seems a lot more doable. And so making sure we break those tasks down.
Couples navigating ADHD and perhaps mismatched communication styles, what message would you most want to leave them with today?
I would say that couples therapy doesn't just have to be I'm going to use a metaphor here, like a full engine repair type of thing, right? So if we come in, sometimes it can be just a tune-up. So if there's flare-ups and occasional miscommunications, it is still a good time to get couples therapy. It just means that the therapy will be probably resolve a little bit quicker. And also, I think you'll be happy you did it down the road. So really my message would just be come into therapy. It doesn't have to be intensive. It doesn't have to be when the relationship is in jeopardy. In fact, it's probably better to just be a little preemptive about it. And like I said, there's no commitment. So, if you don't like it, you can always stop.
That's great. Thank you. I love that. Don't wait till it's broken. That's so much harder to fix. But yeah, the tune up. Love it.
I would say that one other thing that often gets missed is the value of specialized therapy for ADHD. So really in that rotation at Penn, I learned a lot of tools that utilize the strengths of ADHD and step around some of the weaknesses. And so I'd encourage anybody who's dealing with ADHD and struggling with the symptoms to find someone that, specializes in ADHD treatment and set up a couple of appointments with them and just talk about some skills you can use. The medication is always, it is considered the first line and it is important, but the therapy can really be quite a game changer too.
For neurotypical people, I imagine it would be, right, this can be very helpful. You might want to do X, Y, and Z. But that same advice isn't always going to sit with an ADHD person just because those challenges that you said come to light. We might know that doing the dishes would be a positive thing for a relationship and having a tidy house would bring harmony to a relationship. But knowing it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen. As you said, with our interest-based prioritizing, that might be shuffled down the list a little. So having a therapist that understands ADHD and knows some of the challenges, and as you said, some of the walkarounds, and to bring our strengths out to help us deal with our more challenging traits sounds perfect. Thank you. Great advice. What's lighting your fire at the moment in the work that you're doing? Is there anything that's rising above, giving you lots of energy, or what you're really excited about in the work that you're doing? Maybe a breakthrough or a project that you're working on?
Well, I would say there's a lot of projects in the works right now. I run a company called Empower Psychotherapy, so there's quite a bit going on. It keeps me really busy. One of the things we're working on is just offering content to folks that, outside of therapy to follow up on the therapy. So we're building a part of our webpage out that is going to have some tips that are just, if you want to sign up for the website, but maybe you're just not sure if you want therapy yet, or maybe it's just one of those things where, maybe we don't have state coverage yet for you. You can get those tools and, see what you can do with them.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
that's probably one of the, yeah.
And is that available now, or you're working on it?
Very soon. Yeah, I'll have it coming weeks.
Brilliant.
So.
Excellent. We'll make sure we'll put that link in as well. Wonderful.
Mm.
Well, you've been very helpful. Thank you so much. I've really appreciated your time today. And there's a few tips and tricks there, I think, for our listeners that might be curious in how they can improve their relationship with ADHD or their ADHD partner. So you've been very helpful, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
So happy to help. Thanks for having me today.